The sun was low in the sky, painting the desert with shades of orange and red. The cowboy rode slowly, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. He had been traveling for days, moving from one small town to another, carrying supplies and messages between ranches. His clothes were dusty, and his boots were worn from the long journey. His face was tanned and lined from years in the sun, and his eyes held a tired, quiet look. This was not the first time he had ridden alone, and it would not be the last. But today he felt different. There was a heaviness in his chest that he could not shake, a feeling that something was not right. The cowboy had been careful all his life. He had learned to respect the land, to read the weather, and to watch for danger. But even the smartest cowboy could not always predict what the desert would do. The wind was picking up, and the clouds were moving fast across the sky, darkening the edges of the horizon. He knew storms could appear suddenly in this part of the land. His horse seemed uneasy as well, snorting and shifting its weight nervously. The cowboy patted its neck and whispered, "It's all right, boy. We'll be fine." As he rode, his thoughts wandered to home. He missed the smell of fresh bread baking in the kitchen, the sound of children laughing, and the comfort of a warm bed. Those things seemed far away now, almost like a dream from another life. He had chosen this life of riding and wandering, and he had no regrets. But loneliness could be a heavy companion on nights like this. He had friends among the other cowboys, but the connections were brief, like smoke that disappeared quickly. Out here, it was just him, his horse, and the open land stretching endlessly in every direction. The path he followed was rocky and uneven. He had to watch every step the horse took to avoid injury. The cowboy leaned forward in his saddle, holding the reins tightly, feeling the muscles in his arms and back strain with the effort of guiding the horse. He had traveled this route before, but each ride was different. Sometimes the land could hide danger, a loose rock, a sudden drop, or a snake sunning itself on a warm stone. He had learned to move slowly and carefully, even when tired. By mid-afternoon, the sun was hotter, and the cowboy could feel his strength beginning to wane. He slowed the horse to a walk, letting it graze on small patches of grass between the rocks. He wiped sweat from his forehead and took a deep breath of the dry, hot air. The ride had been long, and he had not eaten much that morning. He reached into his saddlebag for a piece of bread and a small chunk of dried meat. He chewed slowly, savoring every bite, knowing that his body needed fuel to continue. As the sun began to sink lower, a strange dizziness came over him. At first, he thought it was just fatigue or hunger, but the feeling would not go away. His head felt light, and his vision blurred slightly. He shook it off, telling himself to keep going. He had faced tough situations before, and had always found a way through, but this time, the dizziness was stronger, and a cold sweat broke out across his back. The horse shifted nervously under him, sensing that something was wrong. He decided to stop and rest for a moment. He dismounted, letting the horse graze while he leaned against a large rock. The desert was quiet, except for the distant call of a bird and the soft whisper of the wind. He closed his eyes for just a moment, but when he opened them, the world seemed to tilt. His legs wobbled, and he barely managed to stay upright. He grabbed the saddle horn for support, but the dizziness would not pass. Something in him whispered fear. He had been through sickness before, but this was different. His chest felt tight, and a sharp pain shot through his side. He knelt down on the ground, pressing a hand against the rock to steady himself. His mind raced with thoughts of what could be happening. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe an old injury had flared up, or maybe it was something more serious. He tried to take deep breaths, but they came in shallow gasps. The feeling of weakness spread through his body, making it hard to move. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. He sank to the ground, sitting on the hot desert sand, unable to lift himself. The sun was now low, casting long shadows that reached like fingers across the land. He looked up at the sky, seeing the first stars beginning to appear. He thought about how alone he was, and a wave of fear washed over him. He had always been strong, always in control. But now he felt powerless. He whispered a small prayer, not sure if anyone would hear it, hoping for some kind of mercy. His horse came closer, nudging him gently with its nose. The cowboy reached out and stroked the animal's mane. "I'm all right, boy," he whispered. Though even he was not sure if that was true. The horse nuzzled him again, a silent companion in a world that suddenly felt too big and too empty. The cowboy closed his eyes, feeling the heat of the day leaving his body as a cool evening breeze swept over him. He tried to stand, but his legs refused to obey. The desert was beautiful, but it felt dangerous, and he realized he might not make it through the night on his own. Hours passed. The sky grew darker, and the stars shone brighter. The cowboy's body grew weaker with every passing moment. His mind drifted between thoughts of home, memories of past rides, and a growing fear that he might not survive. He thought about the people he loved, the friends he had made, and the quiet moments he had cherished in his life. Everything seemed so small now, compared to the vastness of the land and the uncertainty of what was coming. Just as despair began to take hold, he heard a distant sound, soft, careful footsteps approaching. He tried to call out, but found his voice weak, barely more than a whisper. The footsteps grew closer, and soon a figure appeared through the twilight. It was a woman, moving with quiet confidence and care. She carried a small bundle, and her eyes were filled with concern as she approached him. The cowboy tried to speak, but the words would not come. All he could do was look at her, feeling a mixture of fear and relief. The woman knelt beside him, examining his injuries and noticing the pallor of his face. She spoke softly, in a language he did not fully understand, but the tone was kind and calming. She helped him to his feet, supporting him as he stumbled. Her presence was strong yet gentle, and for the first time in hours, he felt a flicker of hope. She gestured for him to follow, and though his body was weak, he trusted her instinctively. Together, they moved slowly across the desert, the cowboy leaning heavily on her as she guided him to a safer place. The stars shone above them, and the wind carried the scent of sage and dry earth. Each step was a struggle, but he kept moving, knowing that he was not alone. His mind was still filled with questions and fear, but the presence of this stranger gave him a sense of direction he had not felt in hours. By the time they reached a small shelter, the cowboy could barely stand. The woman helped him inside and laid him down on a simple bed. He closed his eyes, exhausted, and felt the heat of the fire against his skin. His body was tired, his mind still racing, but he felt a strange sense of safety. For the first time since the fall, he allowed himself to hope that he might survive. As he drifted into an uneasy sleep, the cowboy thought about how quickly life could change. One moment, he had been riding alone through the desert, believing he might die. The next, he was being cared for by a stranger whose kindness he did not yet understand. The desert was vast and unpredictable, but it had brought him to someone who could save him, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he would see another sunrise. When the cowboy woke, the first thing he noticed was the warmth. It was different from the sun's heat outside. This was gentle, steady, like the kind of warmth that comes from a small fire in a safe room. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light. He was lying on a simple bed, with rough but clean blankets. The fire crackled softly in the corner, sending flickering shadows across the walls. For a moment, he did not move, unsure whether he was dreaming or still lost in the desert. As he tried to sit up, he felt a soft hand on his arm. "Easy," a voice said, calm and measured. It was a woman's voice, unfamiliar, yet gentle. The cowboy froze, his heart racing. He was used to being alone, used to danger coming from unexpected directions, but this presence was different. There was no threat in her eyes, only concern. She watched him carefully, ready to help if he tried to move too quickly. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice hoarse and weak. The woman did not speak his language fully, but through gestures and small words, he understood that she had found him when he was lying near death in the desert. She had carried him here, given him water, and tended to his wounds. He realized slowly that without her, he might never have survived the night. The thought made his chest tighten, not from pain, but from the sudden, overwhelming gratitude he felt. She was small, but strong, with eyes that seemed to hold both sorrow and strength. Her hair was dark, and her hands were rough from hard work, yet gentle as they touched his arm. She moved with quiet confidence, as if she knew exactly what needed to be done. The cowboy watched her with a mixture of awe and caution. He had been taught that people like her, Apache women, were to be respected, but kept at a distance. Yet here she was, saving him when he could not save himself. The first days passed slowly. The cowboy could barely move without help, and every action, from drinking water to sitting up, required her guidance. She showed him how to lean on the bed, how to take small bites of food, and how to rest without causing further pain. Her movements were precise, almost like a dance, and the cowboy marveled at how efficiently she cared for him. He had expected strangers to be suspicious or even hostile, yet she offered nothing but kindness. Despite the language barrier, communication found its way. Simple gestures, nods, and pointing at objects allowed them to understand each other. He learned the word for water, the sign for pain, and the gesture for rest. In return, he tried to explain where he had been, what had happened to him, and who he was. Her eyes widened at some of his words, and she nodded at others, as if silently acknowledging the life he had led and the dangers he had faced. During this time, the cowboy had plenty of time to observe his surroundings. The small hut was simple but sturdy, built near a stream that ran quietly through the land. Outside, he could see the desert stretching far, the horizon marked by jagged hills and scattered trees. Inside, everything was clean and organized. Pots and pans hung in rows, bundles of herbs were tied and stacked neatly, and a small fire pit was kept burning for warmth and cooking. Every detail reflected a careful, thoughtful life, one shaped by loss but also by resilience. The cowboy began to realize that this woman had lived through hardship. Her hands bore the marks of years of work, her eyes held a depth of sorrow, and her movements carried quiet strength. She had survived alone for a long time, and now she had chosen to care for him, a stranger, risking her own safety and comfort. This realization filled the cowboy with respect, a respect deeper than he had ever felt for anyone outside his own small circle of fellow cowboys. He also began to notice small acts of kindness that went beyond basic care. She would place a warm cloth on his forehead when he was too hot, bring a bowl of soup just when he was hungry, and hum quietly as she worked, a soft song that eased the tension in the room. The cowboy had not realized how much a gentle presence could mean. Each small gesture reminded him that life could still hold compassion, even in the harshest places. As the days went on, his body slowly healed. The fever that had made him collapse finally left, replaced by a lingering weakness that required patience and careful movement. The woman encouraged him gently, never rushing, never scolding, but always guiding him. He began to take short walks inside the small hut, leaning on the walls for support, and later, stepping outside into the fresh air. Each movement was a triumph, each step a reminder that he was still alive. At night, they would sit near the fire. He would watch her work with herbs or mend clothes, and she would watch him, making sure he was comfortable. Words were few, but the connection grew stronger with each passing day. The cowboy felt something he had not felt in a long time: trust. He trusted her to care for him, to keep him safe, and she trusted him to respect her home and her boundaries. It was a quiet, mutual understanding, built on necessity but strengthened by the human capacity for empathy. He also began to reflect on his own life. The long days alone in the desert had forced him to think about the choices he had made, the friends he had lost, and the loneliness he had accepted as part of his existence. Lying in that simple bed, cared for by someone who had nothing to gain, he realized how narrow his world had been. He had seen people as friends or strangers, allies or enemies, but here was a person who offered kindness without expectation. It challenged everything he thought he knew about trust, loyalty, and the human heart. There were moments of fear, too. Sometimes he would wake in the middle of the night, confused or remembering the desert and the pain that had brought him here. He would see the woman sitting quietly by the fire, awake and alert, and realize he was safe. She would offer him a nod or a gentle hand on his shoulder, and the fear would ease. Over time, he began to sleep longer, more deeply, and wake with the strength to face another day. As the cowboy regained his strength, small details of life outside the hut came into view. The sounds of the stream, the calls of birds, and the rustling of leaves in the evening wind reminded him of the beauty of the world beyond hardship. He started to notice the skill in the woman's work, the way she could mend clothing with precise stitching, or how she could use herbs to soothe aches and pains. Each day brought small lessons, not just in survival but in seeing life from a different perspective. By the end of the second week, the cowboy could walk around the small hut without assistance, though he remained careful. He started helping with chores, fetching water, carrying firewood, and preparing simple meals. The woman would watch him silently at first, then with a nod of approval as he learned. There was a rhythm to their days now. A balance between recovery and life, work and rest. The cowboy realized that being alive was not just about moving through the world, but about participating in it. Even in small ways, the quiet bond between them deepened. Neither spoke much about the past, but in small gestures, glances, and shared work, they learned about each other. The cowboy learned her name, a soft, simple name that carried the weight of her culture and family. She learned his story in fragments, enough to understand that he had faced hardships and dangers, and yet still carried a sense of integrity and honor. Words were less important than understanding, and both came to rely on this silent communication. As part 2 drew to a close, the cowboy felt a mixture of gratitude, awe, and a strange new curiosity. He had entered her home as a stranger, sick and weak, and now he was part of the small rhythm of her life. He understood that without her, he would not have survived, and that this experience was changing him in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. The desert, once a lonely and dangerous place, had led him to safety and to the quiet strength of someone who had known loss, but still gave without hesitation. The cowboy lay in his bed at night, staring at the firelight dancing on the walls, thinking about what had happened. He had expected strangers to fear him or see him as an outsider. Instead, he had found compassion, care, and understanding. For the first time in a long while, he began to believe that human kindness could exist even in the harshest corners of the world. And though he did not yet know what the future held, he knew one thing clearly: he owed his life to her, and that was a debt he would never forget. As the days turned into weeks, the cowboy grew stronger. His body, once weak and trembling, now had energy to move, to walk, and even to help around the small hut. The simple meals and warm fire that had been his lifeline now became part of his daily rhythm. Each day, he noticed how much he had taken for granted during his long rides and lonely life in the desert. Life here was quiet, but it was full of small lessons and moments of connection. He spent mornings helping with chores. The woman showed him how to fetch water from the nearby stream without spilling it, how to stack firewood so it stayed dry, and how to tend a small garden of herbs she used for healing. At first, the cowboy stumbled and made mistakes. He dropped buckets of water, tripped over stones, and sometimes spilled food. But the woman never scolded him. She would smile quietly, show him the right way, and let him try again. Slowly, he learned, and with each small success, he felt a sense of pride he hadn't known in years. During the afternoons, he would rest while she worked. She was always busy, cleaning, cooking, and preparing herbs for her own use. He watched her quietly, noticing her care in every action. Even in small tasks, she moved with purpose and skill. Her life was one of discipline, shaped by necessity and survival, but also by respect for the land and its gifts. The cowboy felt a deep admiration growing inside him. He realized that courage and strength came in many forms, and that her quiet determination was as powerful as the courage he had always relied on in the open desert. They spent evenings by the fire, the only sounds being the crackle of flames and the occasional call of a distant bird. Communication was still limited, but words were not always needed. Sometimes, the cowboy would offer a piece of bread or water, and she would smile softly. Other times, she would gesture for him to sit closer, showing a small kindness that spoke louder than words. They began to understand each other in ways that went beyond language, through shared experiences, trust, and quiet companionship. The cowboy also began to think about his life and the choices that had led him here. He remembered the long days of riding alone, the dangers he had faced, and the times he had felt invincible. Yet here, in this small hut, he realized that survival was not just about skill or bravery, it was about connection, about accepting help when it was offered, and about learning to trust another human being. He had always seen the world as a place of danger, where everyone looked out for themselves. Now, he began to see that kindness could exist even in the harshest places, and that people could care for each other without expecting anything in return. Slowly, their bond deepened. The cowboy began to share small stories of his life, speaking in simple words and gestures. He talked about the open deserts he had crossed, the rivers he had followed, and the small towns where he had delivered messages and goods. The woman listened quietly, nodding and occasionally responding with a word or gesture that showed she understood. In turn, she shared bits of her own life, showing him the garden she tended, the herbs she used, and the small rituals that guided her days. The cowboy realized that even though their worlds were different, they both understood loss, survival, and the quiet joys of simple life. One afternoon, the cowboy decided to try walking outside alone. The sun was warm, and a gentle breeze blew across the land. He felt nervous at first, fearing he might stumble or faint, but he took a deep breath, holding on to the memories of the woman's care, and stepped out into the open. The world seemed brighter, fuller, and yet still harsh. He felt the strength returning to his legs, the confidence growing in his step. The woman watched from the doorway, smiling softly, giving him the freedom to move on his own while remaining nearby in case he needed help. As he explored the small area around the hut, he began to notice the beauty of the land in ways he never had before. The patterns of the rocks, the movement of the stream, and the colors of the plants all seemed to carry a quiet meaning. He remembered the deserts he had crossed, often seeing only danger and emptiness. Now, he began to understand that even harsh places could hold life, color, and moments of wonder. This new awareness changed him, giving him a deeper appreciation for the world he had once only passed through. The woman also began to trust him more. She allowed him to help with more difficult tasks, such as gathering firewood from further away or preparing herbs for drying. She watched as he learned quickly, careful but capable. And gradually she stopped hovering, letting him take responsibility for his actions. The cowboy felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was contributing, not just surviving. He was becoming part of a life that was not his own, but one that he could respect and participate in. Over time, their conversations became easier. He learned a few words of her language, and she learned some of his. While still limited, these words allowed them to share more ideas, jokes, and small observations about daily life. They laughed together when he made mistakes, like spilling water or tripping over firewood. And the sound of their laughter filled the small hut with warmth. These moments of shared humor and understanding brought comfort to both of them, and slowly the cowboy began to feel that he belonged somewhere again. The cowboy also started to reflect on the lessons of patience and care he had learned. Before, he had been impatient, always moving quickly, always seeking the next task or adventure. Now, he saw the value in slowing down, observing, and acting carefully. He understood that life was not always about speed or daring feats. It was also about observation, preparation, and thoughtfulness. Watching the woman work and care for him taught him more about resilience and skill than any long ride through the desert ever had. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of pink and gold, the cowboy and the woman sat quietly near the fire. He looked at her and saw the strength, courage, and quiet wisdom in her eyes. She had lived through loss, loneliness, and hardship. Yet she had chosen to care for him. A stranger in need, the realization filled him with gratitude, respect, and a new sense of humility. He understood that survival was never only about oneself, it was also about the people who supported, guided, and believed in you when you could not stand on your own. The days continued in this gentle rhythm. The cowboy gained confidence in his movements, skills in caring for himself and assisting with chores, and a deeper understanding of the woman's life. They began to share small stories of the past, tales of family, of hardships, of moments that had shaped them. Through these stories, they found common ground despite their different worlds. Both had known loss, both had survived against the odds, and both had learned to value quiet courage. One morning, the cowboy woke early and noticed the first signs of frost on the ground. The season was changing, and with it, the realization that he would soon need to continue his journey. He felt a mixture of anticipation and sadness. He had grown attached to the woman and the safety of her home. At the same time, he knew the land still called to him, and the responsibilities and duties of his life could not be ignored. He would need to leave eventually, but not without understanding the lessons he had learned here. As part 3 comes to a close, the cowboy understood that he had been transformed. He had entered her life as a weak, injured stranger, and now he was leaving with strength, knowledge, and a new perspective on trust, kindness, and human connection. The bond they had formed was quiet but powerful, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the understanding that survival was never truly solitary. He had learned that even in a world filled with challenges, people could be kind, compassionate, and wise. He had discovered the importance of patience, observation, and humility, and he had realized that the simplest acts of care, offering food, guiding a step, listening silently, could change a life more than any heroic deed ever could. The cowboy sat by the fire that night, staring at the dancing flames, thinking about the days to come. He knew that when he left, he would carry these lessons with him forever. The woman had shown him a new way to see the world, and in doing so, she had saved more than just his body, she had saved his spirit. The desert had been harsh, unforgiving, and dangerous, but it had led him to something invaluable: understanding, connection, and the quiet strength of another human being who had chosen to care without expectation. The cowboy woke early one morning to the soft glow of dawn. The first light of the sun painted the desert in shades of gold and pink, and a gentle breeze carried the crisp smell of morning air. He had been stronger for weeks now, walking without help, helping with chores, and learning from the woman who had saved him. But today, a quiet thought lingered in his mind. It was time to leave. He felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, he was eager to return to the life he had known, the open desert, the towns, and the work that had defined him for years. On the other hand, he felt sadness and hesitation. The woman who had cared for him was more than a stranger now. She had become a part of his life, a presence he had come to trust and respect deeply. The thought of leaving her behind filled him with a gentle ache he had never known. The woman, sensing his restlessness, did not speak immediately. Instead, she quietly prepared breakfast over the fire, her movements calm and deliberate. The cowboy watched her, noticing the small gestures he had come to admire. The way she measured the water, the careful stirring of a simple porridge, the way her eyes softened when she looked at him. It was a life built on patience, skill, and quiet strength. He understood that she had survived hardship by mastering the small details of each day, and in doing so, she had taught him more than words ever could. After breakfast, she began to gather supplies for his journey. She filled a small bag with dried meat, bread, and water, making sure he had everything he would need to travel alone. She added a few herbs, tied carefully in a small cloth, which could help heal minor injuries or soothe aches. The cowboy watched her, feeling both gratitude and humility. He realized that her care extended beyond the present moment. She had prepared him to survive in the world outside, the world that had once seemed dangerous and unforgiving. As he packed, the cowboy took a moment to look around the hut one last time. The walls, the fire, the small garden outside it all held memories of the weeks he had spent here. He thought of the quiet mornings, the long afternoons of rest and observation, and the evenings by the fire where silence spoke louder than words. He remembered the moments of laughter, the small lessons learned, and the trust that had grown between them. The hut had been more than a shelter. It had been a place of transformation. When he finally stood at the doorway, the woman was waiting. She had dressed simply, ready for the day, but her eyes held a mixture of pride and sorrow. They did not need words to communicate. Both knew this farewell was difficult. She gestured toward the horizon, where the path would take him back to the desert trails he had once traveled. The cowboy nodded, understanding that their lives were about to diverge once more, yet the connection between them would remain. He adjusted the saddle on his horse, feeling the familiar weight of the journey ahead. The horse nickered softly, sensing the quiet tension of the moment. The cowboy patted its neck, feeling the strength returning to his body, and took a deep breath of the cool morning air. He turned to the woman one last time, offering a simple nod of thanks. She responded with a small smile, and though no words were exchanged, the meaning was clear. Gratitude, respect, and an understanding that some bonds, once formed, never fade. The first steps on the trail were tentative. The cowboy's legs were strong, but his mind carried the weight of the weeks he had spent recovering. He remembered the pain and fear of the desert, the nights spent unsure if he would live, and the remarkable kindness that had saved him. Each step felt like a promise to himself, to the woman, and to the life he was returning to, that he would carry the lessons of this experience wherever he went. As he rode, the desert stretched endlessly before him. The sun rose higher, warming the land, and the wind whispered through the sparse trees and rocks. The cowboy felt a deep sense of clarity. He realized that survival was not only about skill or courage, but also about connection, trust, and compassion. The woman had shown him that strength came in many forms, and that true bravery included the willingness to care for others without expectation. The days on the trail were long, but the cowboy felt a new energy within him. He rode with careful attention to his surroundings, aware of every detail, the rustle of leaves, the call of distant birds, the shifting shadows on the ground. The lessons from the hut remained with him. Patience, observation, and respect for the world around him. He remembered the quiet mornings by the stream, the careful tending of herbs, and the woman's gentle guidance. These memories were now part of him, shaping how he moved through the world. At night, he would make camp under the stars, just as he had done before. But his perspective had changed. He no longer saw the wilderness as a place of fear alone. He saw beauty, resilience, and opportunity. The desert was harsh, yes, but it also held life, color, and the possibility of connection. He thought about the woman and her home, imagining her tending the fire, preparing herbs, and carrying on with her quiet strength. He knew that she had given him more than physical survival. She had given him a deeper understanding of life itself. Throughout the journey, the cowboy reflected on what he had learned. He had discovered that human kindness could exist even in unexpected places, and that trust, once earned, was a powerful gift. He realized that life was not just about surviving hardships, but also about building connections, appreciating small acts of care, and finding strength in the presence of others. These lessons would guide him for the rest of his days. Eventually, he approached the edge of the land that marked the beginning of familiar trails. The horizon stretched wide, leading to towns, ranches, and the life he had known before. He felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The journey ahead would be challenging, but he was no longer the same man who had collapsed in the desert. He carried the strength, knowledge, and humility gained from the weeks of recovery and the guidance of the woman who had saved him. As he rode the final stretch, he thought about gratitude. He had been given a second chance at life, and it was a gift he could not forget. The woman had risked her comfort and safety to care for him, showing a courage that went beyond physical strength. Her actions had reminded him that even in a harsh world, compassion and kindness could prevail. He promised himself that he would honor that gift by living fully, wisely, and with respect for the people and the world around him. When he finally reached a place where he could see signs of civilization, he paused. The towns, the trails, and the people waiting ahead were part of the life he had once known, but he also knew that he would carry a part of the small hut, the woman's guidance, and the lessons of the desert with him wherever he went. Survival was no longer just about reaching a destination, it was about the journey, the people met along the way, and the understanding gained through shared humanity. As the sun set on that day, the cowboy reflected on the transformation he had experienced. He had come into the world weary, injured, and unsure of his future. He had left the hut with strength, clarity, and a deeper understanding of trust, compassion, and resilience. The woman had not only saved his life but had also opened his eyes to the richness of human connection and the quiet power of care. The cowboy rode on, the desert stretching ahead. His body was stronger, his mind sharper, and his heart fuller than it had been for many years. He would never forget the woman who had given him shelter, guidance, and kindness when he needed it most. And though their paths had diverged, he knew that the lessons he had learned, and the bond they had formed, would remain with him forever. Every step forward was a reminder of the gift he had been given, a gift that shaped not only his survival but also the way he would live the rest of his life. He had been changed in ways he could not yet fully express, but he knew one thing for certain. Life, even in its harshest form, could bring moments of hope, connection, and transformation that lasted far longer than the hardships endured. The cowboy rode into the horizon, carrying gratitude, wisdom, and a newfound understanding of the world. The desert, once a place of danger and loneliness, had become a teacher. The woman, a stranger turned guardian, had shown him that survival was more than physical endurance. It was about the heart, the choices we make, and the compassion we offer and receive. And with that knowledge, he faced the future not as a man who had survived, but as a man who had been truly changed.